Okay, so let's take a look at some of the basic elements of a coffee cupping. What I'm going to do here is a very simplified version that's going to just take us through the ways in which we extract and sample the aromas and the flavors that come out of the coffee. So over here on my cupping table, I have a few cups and I have coffee beans already here measured out for the cupping. The next step that we're going to do is actually grind the coffee, and then we're going to leave it to sit. And then we'll sample the aroma of the ground coffee before adding any water. For today, what we're going to do is take a look at two coffees, one of which I was introduced to through an event that I attended at the Specialty Coffee Association. This is a Colombian Oak and Bond specialty coffee. And then the second that we'll take a look at is our own Artifx Cafe Monteverde Natural, a natural processed coffee that I know has a really intriguing aromas and flavors. So I've got 2 cups of each, so we can check it across 2 different cups for consistency. As another note, in again a formal cupping of coffee, you might have 5 different coffees. So you're set up with 5 bowls with 5 different coffees, and then there's another station of 5 and another station of 5, and multiple people are evaluating this coffee. And large coffee companies will do this on a daily basis, often multiple times a day, rotating different teams of people through to evaluate the coffee for consistency. So let's go ahead and begin the process, shall we? Okay, so we've had our ground coffee sitting for a while. So we've got, first of all, our Colombian Oak and Bond. And we're going to get really down into the coffee. Get our nose all the way in there. You want to get all those aromas. Okay, and now we'll take a look at our Costa Rican Natural. And if you're working along with me here, you'd notice a very different flavor from these 2 coffees. So you can pick up some of the subtle notes. A natural coffee, as we talked about, is going to have more fruity notes that come from the fact that it was dried with the entire pulp and skin intact, whereas this one is more of the traditional washed process. Okay, so we've picked up some of those early aromas. We're going to do another aroma test, but that now is going to be after we have added the water. So that's going to be our next step. Shall we go ahead? So I have my water that's been sitting here held at 200 degrees. Again, you want to keep it between 195 and 200. Don't let it go all the way up to boiling temperature, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're using a kettle, by the way, and you boil your water to brew coffee, leave it after it's boiled, turn it off and let it sit for about 30 to 40 seconds covered, and that'll let the temperature come down. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, take our kettle, and I'm going to go ahead and add to my grounds. And I'm going to pour somewhat evenly. What's happening here is what's referred to as the bloom. So that coffee, that CO2 is coming off, and it's creating this almost like an effervescence on the top of the coffee. And we're going to let that sit for a bit. The coffee is going to start to form like a crust. The grounds of the coffee are mixed in with that bit of foam on the top from that effervescence. And we're going to leave this now for 4 minutes. So I'm going to pull out my timer on my phone, and I'm going to set that for 4 minutes. And in that time, what's happening is oils are being released, and more and different aromas are going to be available to us. And we're going to then let this sit, and we're going to smell that first. Smell those aromas that are released on the top of that crust that's formed on the coffee. There's actually a different process going on underneath that crust. And after we've smelled what's happening on top, we're going to break or cut the crust, releasing those aromas now that have been trapped underneath, and get a slightly different sensory experience. Now, some of these sensations, these aromas are very subtle changes, and people actually go through intense training courses to train their palate, train their noses to pick up these very slight variations and subtle changes in aroma. There's a level of qualification called a Q grader. And these are the folks who are trained with that sensory perception to evaluate one type of coffee from another, one flavor of coffee from another. So it's really an art and a science that's been developed over many decades. So we'll let this sit for 4 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and dig in a little bit more into aromas, and then we'll start to actually taste the coffee. Okay, our 4 minutes has elapsed. Let's see how it smells. Now this coffee has notes of a brown sugar aroma, as well as a bit of citrus, maybe a hint of chocolate. Now the natural coffee from Monteverde has additionally more of those fruity. It's almost like a cherry kind of flavor aroma to it as well, and those chocolatey notes are present also. So the next step here is we're going to do what we call cutting the crust, and here we're finally going to get one of our spoons. So the idea here is to gently move away this layer on top that has these coffee grounds mixed in with a little of this effervescence, and we're going to see what new aromas are released. And there are a couple different ways of doing this. I'll sort of show you the way I was first taught. But you really want to get your nose all the way down in there, and we're going to now push away the crust and smell at the same time. Now each time as you're going from one coffee to the next, you can just dip and rinse off your spoon in water. And you get some more intense aromas starting to come out as you start to mix the coffee. The grounds will fall to the bottom. All right, so the next step is we're going to clear away some of the remaining grounds from the top of the cup. This will take a while. It's a little bit of a messy process, but I'm going to scrape away some of that crust and whatever grounds are sitting on the top, and just dump some of that off of here, just so that I'm not drinking too much of that stuff. Whatever settled to the bottom, we'll just leave it and let it settle, because when we get to our tasting, we're going to be tasting off the top of the cup. Now we're going to go ahead and actually taste the coffee. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do a process called aspiration. So the spoons that we use, these are actually soup spoons. They have some depth to them. They're not very shallow, so we can get some depth of coffee in there. And then we're going to hold it to our lips, and we're going to actually slurp it in. So coffee cupping is a pretty noisy process. And the reason we're doing that is we're going to pull air in along with the coffee, and we want to create like a spray so that that coffee, as it's going into our mouth, is coating all the different sensory surfaces of our mouth. Right? Different parts of your tongue pick up different flavors, different areas along the roof and the palate of the mouth and so on sense different kinds of flavors as well. So we're going to take a really hard slurp and get that coffee sprayed all over, and then we'll sort of savor that flavor. And then you have the option of either spitting that out, or you can swallow it and then go on to the next the next coffee. The more formal way, of course, is to spit it out. You'd have a little spittoon off at the side of the table, but we're going to go ahead. I know these coffees pretty well, and we're not doing so many different ones, so I'm going to go ahead and swallow. I hate wasting good coffee. Okay, let's go. We'll take a little bit off the top, and then we're going to slurp. So it's a quick, hard slurp. I really get this sort of both the brown sugar and that kind of slight citrus flavor gets picked up. A little bit of tangy towards the back of the tongue. One of the other things that you pick up in coffees is what's called the body of the coffee, and that's sort of a measure of how much oils and fats there are in the coffee, and you can feel that by rubbing the coffee while it's in your mouth between your tongue and the roof of the mouth. And you can imagine doing that with water versus doing that with like whole milk, and you can get a sense of how different that sensation would be. The more fatty, like the whole milk, would feel very smooth as you run your tongue across the roof of your mouth. whereas water, again, there's almost like no texture that you would noticeably feel. Coffee is going to fall somewhere in between those, and some coffees have a lot of body, meaning there's going to be like more fats to it, closer to like a whole milk, and others are going to be more like water. You want to be somewhere in between. You don't want it to be completely watery, and then most of them won't have as much body as like a whole milk. Okay, let's go ahead. I'll switch spoons just for formality here. You want to take a moment and move that coffee around with your tongue. Let it settle in on different parts of the mouth so you can pick up the different flavors. All right, so that's a little bit of the basics of the cupping process and the ways in which we can enjoy and sense the aromas and the unique flavors of coffee. And it's such a neat way to understand how coffee varies from one region to another, from one type of coffee plant to another. All of these get picked up in the aromas and flavors and gives us a sense of the diversity that exists in coffee.